Our community is suffering from a great number of misconceptions. These are not only being spread by individuals with no programming experience. In some cases, they are propagated by the developers themselves. Discussed herein are some of the worst offenders which currently divide our community. Additional information will be provided in the description box. Should you not understand a topic, do not hesitate to ask your questions. A divided community is a defeated community. Now then, some new information before we begin. Here are the delays for multiple shots fired in succession. One would expect each individual bullet to have the same delay, assuming no change to ping, but no, they do not. The first shot never causes damage sooner than expected, but the following shots do. This results in damage spikes, which in turn cause the player or host to die far too quickly. This is one reason for the appearance of instant death, and it is also a cause of inconsistency in gameplay, specifically as related to weapon damage variance and player versus host advantage. The greater the delay, the greater the concentration of damage, and the more obvious these problems become. As BlackOps2 has extraordinary delays at the best of pings, caused by very poor design decisions, this is hardly a rare occurrence. Next, for those who are unaware, another member of the community has gone through the trouble of recording PS3 split screen, where delays exist as well. I have confirmed on Xbox, for which online matchmaking, system link, and local split screen all show a delay of at least 100 to 150 milliseconds at 0 ping. But this may be the cause of some confusion as to the relation between movement delay and camera position, bringing us to the first misconception of the video. To help clear this up, I have built a simple game for you. Note the camera is attached to the player model and it does not move independently. If the player model moves, the camera moves with it, as part of the model. This is how most games operate. In the case of BlackOps2, when moving, your player model will not be in the same position when seen by the other players. Yes, that means the camera position is different as well, however, it is not independent of the model. The importance of this distinction becomes clear when considering how first-person shooters calculate damage. Most use raycasting, that is, when you shoot, you're basically firing invisible lasers. These originate from the position of your crosshairs, typically the center of the camera through which you see the game. When that camera is too far above your head, you can shoot over objects, as with head glitching. If the camera is too far forward, you can shoot through objects. And if the camera moved independently of the player model, not only would you be able to inflict damage before you became visible, but you could clip through walls. Ignoring that, which we can all agree does not happen, the equality between sight and damage delays contradicts this camera hypothesis. With a camera problem, this would not be seen. Furthermore, the equal reaction time shown here combined with synchronized death directly supports the existence of an intentional networking delay. Which brings me to networking. I'll give you a quick overview of what is actually involved. In match networking in a COD-style game is responsible for only three things: position, rotation, and action. It is completely separate from graphics, physics, and other calculations. It simply exchanges information. Kill cams and theater mode require saving those positions, rotations, and actions so they may be played back at a later time. They have no effect on networking whatsoever, but they are dependent on it. As a developer, the programming difficulty increases exponentially with the complexity of the networking method, as does time required. However, such complexity is not necessary to create an experience akin to COD 4. For example, back to the simple game. This is based on an authoritative server model, with client-side prediction for movement and lag comp for registering damage. It took less than 1 hour to write and test the code. Despite an obvious lack of optimization and effort, my player delays are effectively cut by up to half or more as compared to BlackOps2. Critically, players do not start with a 150 millisecond disadvantage even in split screen, and in a real game, players would not experience the inconsistency we have come to expect from COD's recent offerings. If I can do this in 1 hour, Treyarch should have been able to do it in 2 years. Moving on to another issue they should have been able to fix in 2 years, matchmaking. It is incredibly simple to create a regular matchmaking system. It is only automating what PC players have been doing manually for about 2 decades. Unfortunately, matchmaking in BlackOps2 may exhibit the same pattern seen in many other aspects of the game, core flaws in the design process. One cannot assume physical distance in the real world equates to lower pings. You must account for actual wire travel distance as well as the significant hardware delays along the path. It is possible to have a ping of 200 milliseconds to a player across the street, or even within the same residence, simply by having different internet service providers. Designing a matchmaking system based on location is counterintuitive, and doing so both limits a player's ability to find games in a timely manner, as well as that player's eventual gameplay experience when in-game. Instead of wasting time and resources developing ineffective methods of predicting connection quality, one could simply check that quality directly. If our developers were to spend more time thinking before acting, they may discover that making Call of Duty is actually very simple, and that simplicity is worth pursuing. Next is an issue of terminology, lag compensation. It is a bit of a misnomer. BlackOps2 uses lag comp, but that is not its exact networking type by definition. It is just one aspect of the overall networking method. Each such aspect has its pros and cons, and in the software world, these individual parts are being created every day and are not always mutually exclusive. As distinction here is not currently important or even relevant, many of us in the community have continued to use lag comp in our discussion to refer to how the game handles lag as a whole. The term is simple, straightforward, and immediately understood, perhaps less misunderstood than networking, which has far too broad of a scope for our uses. The alternative could result in using a different name with every iteration, confusing the average person, or worse, it could not even have an accepted name. Nevertheless, please keep the distinction in mind, for diverting attention away from the real issues is a common tactic used by forum trolls and COD developers alike. So, what does lag compensation actually do? It allows a player to fire directly at another player without leading their shots. The vast majority of FPS games today use lag compensation, their developers judging its improvement to the gameplay experience as worth its cost. That cost? Players dying after reaching cover. But make no mistake, lag compensation generally only handles lag within a few hundred milliseconds, and it will not have you dying behind cover a full second later. That is an example of BlackOps2's form of networking, which, behind the scenes, more closely resembles that of an RTS than an FPS. From all of this new information players have learned concerning the origin of lag in the recent COD games, we now have a new issue, that is, the carrying over of lag comp related information from previous releases. It is extremely important to realize that the information I have provided here applies to BlackOps2 and BlackOps2 alone. The same goes for my video concerning Modern Warfare 3, and any advantages given to laggy players at the time. This does not apply to BlackOps2 or any other game for that matter. As stated earlier, networking methods are being created every day. Every COD release since COD 4, except perhaps COD 5, has employed a noticeably different method of lag compensation. What applies to one game does not apply to any other. There is a common ground, and to that end I will one day upload an entire commentary dedicated to networking, should our developers continue to demonstrate incompetence on the matter. However, until that time, please treat all information as game-specific. A fairly recent misconception is that of hitbox desynchronization between player and host. This does not happen in BlackOps2, rather it is the entire player model. The hitboxes are invisible and are what you must hit in order to inflict damage. They allow for adjusting damage depending on which part of the body you hit. There is a different hitbox for the head, chest, etc., and hitting one of them with a raycast is how FPS games determine damage. To illustrate what happens when hitboxes are not synchronized, here is a very old game. The hitbox is displayed in wireframe. As you can see, firing directly at the moving player causes no damage and is what you would see if there was no lag comp present in the game. It should be plainly obvious BlackOps2 does not suffer from this problem. Lastly, I need to clear up a misconception for which I am personally responsible. Host advantage in BlackOps2. As I chose not to speak in detail on the matter, it led to a lot of questions, the most common of which is as follows. If a player is coming from behind a corner and sees the host early, even though the player's shots register at a delay, they still register. So doesn't that mean there's a host disadvantage? Without prior knowledge in programming, this can be a complex issue for many users. I will provide an example with a timeline, 0 being synchronized across all players and seen as the present time rather than the past or the future. This could be viewed as the host's time in other FPS games. In the given situation, the player will see the host at t minus 200 milliseconds. After the player's reaction time, it will fire at the host at t plus 100 and hit the host at t plus 300. If the host also has a reaction time of 300 milliseconds, the host will damage the player at t plus 350. Yes, the player has an advantage here. However, if the host in this situation were instead another player, it would not inflict damage until t plus 500, as it has a delay of 200 milliseconds, not 50. This gives a comparative advantage of 150 milliseconds to the host. The host does not and will not ever have an advantage versus a player moving from cover, but compared to a player in the same situation, the host does have a significant advantage. In a reversed situation where the host has the site advantage, the host's advantage is exactly the same as a player would have over another player, thereby illustrating the fact that host advantage in BlackOps2 results from having less of a disadvantage to players moving from cover. In actual gameplay, no one player will have the cover-based advantage 100% of the time unless every opponent does not move for the entire game. Therefore, as host, you should always experience better gameplay than you would had you been a player. By no means does this better gameplay mean good gameplay, rather less bad. Advantage or disadvantage is not clear-cut in BlackOps2. In most FPS games, connection quality is the only networking variable to concern yourself with. If you have a bad connection, you can expect bad gameplay. Even Modern Warfare 3 followed that pattern, albeit reversed. BlackOps2, however, does not. It is primarily situational, meaning you need to understand how the game operates in order to understand why there is such inconsistency between games. I am aware that most people do not want to spend the time and effort learning this by looking at collected data and applying reason. They bought the game to play it, not dissect it. So for these individuals, here's the rundown. Treyarch compensated, if you will, for actions but not reactions. As an observer, the game is perfectly synchronized, and everyone sees exactly the same gameplay at exactly the same time. However, the moment you try to act based on what you see, that is, play the game, it completely falls apart. Any player given the option to react will find themselves at a significant disadvantage. Precisely how great that disadvantage or advantage is given your situation can be seen in the table provided. The outcome of each battle is decided by factors generally outside of a player's control, tossing aside any notion of skill-based gameplay in favor of luck and abuse of glitches. These problems I have discussed cannot be solved by anything we, the users, can do. It is the developer who caused this, and only the developer can fix it. It is a defective product. In other industries, this would cause a recall, but not so in the gaming industry. We, at least where I live, cannot return this game. We are stuck with it. I understand the desire to somehow justify your purchase, particularly for those who cannot afford to buy a replacement. I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but this is simply out of our control as end users. The best you can hope for is a trade-in to minimize your losses. Purchasing games these days is little more than a gamble, and in this case we lost. But the same may not be true for the community as a whole. The failure of BlackOps2 and Modern Warfare 3 may be a blessing in disguise. With just these past 2 releases, even the casual players have become significantly more informed about topics they once scarcely understood. We are now at a crossroads. The potential does exist for the community to break apart and the entire COD series to die, yet the potential also exists for the community to band together once more. The potential exists for past wounds to heal. We may disagree on balancing decisions, we may disagree on difficulty, but the one thing we will never disagree on is that games should function correctly. I have created these videos in an effort to solve the greatest issues with this series. First, ignorance. These videos are as close to irrefutable proof of the existence of our problems as can be reasonably achieved. Second, incompetence. Along with exposing the issues at hand, I have provided simple solutions which any novice programmer can understand. But I alone cannot compete with apathy. If the developers simply do not care, nothing I do can change that. It is up to you, the community as a whole, to act. You have more power than you might think, for it is you who decide the fate of the entire industry. Without you, there would be no Activision, and I'm not only speaking of the past. With every purchase you make, you shape the games of tomorrow. So think carefully next time you are faced with a decision of whom to give your money to. Think of what quality you would like to see in next year's games, and think of who would best use your collective multi-billion dollars to produce the quality you desire. It is time we made purchases based on merit. It is time we took control of our future.